My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 34 years working as a family court advocate, and in that time, I learned one thing above all else. The most dangerous situations are never the loud ones. The quiet ones are what you have to watch. I never thought I would need that lesson inside my own home. I never thought I would be sitting across a dinner table from my daughter, watching her become a stranger to herself, and wondering how long I had been too polite to see it. But I am getting ahead of myself. My daughter, I will call her my daughter, because that is what she is. That is, everything she is to me, was 32 years old when she met him. She had just finished her second year as a pediatric nurse, working long shifts at a children's hospital outside of Atlanta. She was the kind of woman who remembered her patients' birthdays, who left little notes in their charts just to make the next nurse smile. She had her father's laugh and my stubbornness, and for 32 years, that combination had served her beautifully. He came into her life at a charity fundraiser her hospital co-sponsored. He was in real estate development, tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who knows exactly how much space to take up in a room without seeming arrogant about it. He found her near the dessert table, she told me later, and said something that made her laugh so hard she had to set down her plate. She called me that same night. I was already in bed. She said, "Mama, I think I just met someone." I asked her what he was like. She said, "He actually listened to me talk about work for 45 minutes. And he asked questions." I told her that was a good sign. I meant it. Over the next several months, he was everything she described. He sent flowers to her apartment on a Tuesday for no reason. He drove 2 hours to attend her hospital's annual gala as her date, wore a suit that fit like it had been made for him, and spent the evening asking her colleagues about their research. He called my daughter brilliant in front of other people and seemed to mean it. He told her she was the most competent person he had ever met. He told her that being around her made him want to be better. I met him for the first time about 4 months in. He brought me a small orchid plant, not a bouquet, not a generic grocery store arrangement, but a living thing, something that required attention. He said he had heard I had a green thumb. My daughter had told him. He remembered. I liked him. I want to say that plainly. I liked him, and I thought he was good for her, and I was glad she had found someone who seemed to see her clearly. That is the part I have had to sit with the longest. Not the anger, the fact that I was glad. They dated for just over a year before he proposed. The proposal was private, just the two of them, on the back porch of a rental house they had taken for a long weekend in Savannah. No audience, no performance. She said he told her he didn't want to share the moment with anyone else. She told me this, and her voice was soft in a way I hadn't heard since she was small. They were engaged for 8 months. The wedding was in October, on a Saturday, in a garden venue outside the city. It was warm enough for the reception to stay outdoors. I danced with my daughter to a song she had loved since college, and she rested her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was a girl, and I thought, she is happy. She is genuinely happy. And I am not going to let my professional instincts rob me of this moment. That is the sentence I have returned to more times than I can count. I am not going to let my professional instincts rob me of this moment. The first thing I noticed, and I want to be precise here, because precision matters, was not an argument. It was not a raised voice. It was a correction. We were at brunch, maybe 6 weeks after they got back from their honeymoon. My daughter was telling a story about a patient, something funny that had happened during a shift. She was 3 sentences in when he interrupted gently to point out that she had gotten a detail wrong. The day of the week. She had said Tuesday. He said it was actually Wednesday. He remembered because she had texted him that morning. She stopped, checked herself, said, "You're right, Wednesday, sorry," then continued the story. I watched her face in the half-second between his correction and her response. Something moved through it that was not quite embarrassment and not quite surprise. Something older than both of those things. Something that looked, in that brief moment, like reflex. I filed it away. I told myself, couples correct each other. It means nothing. 3 weeks after that, I called my daughter on a Thursday evening, as I always did. She picked up after one ring, which was unusual. She was typically somewhere in the middle of her shift change and would call me back within the hour. But she picked up immediately, and the first thing she said was, "Is everything okay?" I said yes. "I was just calling to talk." There was a small pause. Then she said, "Of course. Let me just—" And I heard her moving, a door closing softly. Then her voice changed register, just slightly, and we talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things. Her garden, a book she was reading, a new coffee shop near the hospital. I did not ask about the pause. I did not ask why she had moved to another room. I told myself she wanted privacy. That is a reasonable thing to want. But I had spent 34 years in family court, and I knew what it sounded like when someone was moving away from a room before they spoke. I knew what it meant when a person's voice changed, register the moment they were out of earshot. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself that loving someone and working in advocacy were two different things, and I could not spend my daughter's marriage looking for evidence of something that might not be there. I tried. I genuinely tried. By the time they had been married for 8 months, my daughter had stopped telling stories at brunch. It was not sudden. That is the thing I most want people to understand. It was not a moment. It was a drift, like watching the tide go out so slowly that you keep thinking the water is still there, still warm, still full. And then one day you look down and your feet are on dry sand, and you cannot remember exactly when that happened. She still came to brunch. She still laughed. She ordered the same thing she always ordered and asked about my garden and showed me photos on her phone. But the stories, the long, wandering, full-bodied stories she had always told, the ones where she acted out the voices of her patients, where she looped back to add details she'd forgotten, where she laughed at herself mid-sentence, those had gotten shorter, more careful. She would start one and then sand the edges off before she finished it. She would trail off and say, "Anyway," and change the subject. I noticed when she stopped wearing the necklace I had given her for her 30th birthday. A small gold piece. Simple. Something she had worn almost every day for 2 years. I did not ask. I filed it away. I noticed when she started arriving to things exactly on time or slightly late, when she had always been early. She had been an early person her entire life. She used to say that being late was a way of telling people their time didn't matter. Now she arrived at the exact minute, or 2 minutes after, and there was always a reason: traffic, a parking situation, a call that ran long. I noticed when she began qualifying her own opinions before she finished stating them. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but she had never done that before. She had always been a woman who stated what she thought and then listened carefully to disagreement. Now she pre-apologized for her own perspective. I noticed all of it. I said nothing. Because I was not certain, and because she was an adult, and because I had promised myself I would not let my work follow me into my family. I noticed and I waited, and I told myself that if something was wrong, she would tell me. She did not tell me. What she did instead, and I understand now that she may not have even realized she was doing it, was start calling me more frequently on weekday mornings. Not long calls. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. She would call while she was driving to work, or sometimes while she was still in the hospital parking garage before her shift. We would talk about nothing in particular, and then she would say she had to go. And I would say I loved her, and she would say it back in a voice that was trying to be light. It was the parking garage calls that told me everything I needed to know, not what she said during them, what she didn't say, and where she was saying it from. A car, alone, before she went inside. A small, sealed space where no one could hear her. Calling the one person who had always been safe, I started paying closer attention to him. He was, by every visible measure, pleasant. He held doors. He asked follow-up questions. At family gatherings, he was engaged and warm and never monopolized the conversation. He was the kind of man who makes a good impression on parents, and I understood now that this was not incidental. It was a skill. The same way that knowing how to listen for 45 minutes is a skill. The same way that bringing an orchid instead of flowers to a first meeting is a skill. What I began to notice, once I was watching carefully, was the way he managed information about my daughter. He would answer questions directed at her. Not rudely, not obviously, he would answer them in a way that sounded like helpfulness. She would be in the middle of forming a response, and he would step in, gently, with a fuller version. He would add context. He would correct the timeline. He would say, "What she means is," before she had finished saying what she meant. And she would stop and nod and let him finish. She had started letting him finish her sentences. My daughter, who had once told me she could talk her way out of a paper bag, and had the stories to prove it. I called her on a Monday morning, one of the parking garage calls, and I asked her, very carefully, how she was doing. Not in the polite way, in the real way. I let the silence sit after I asked. She said, "I'm okay, Mama. I'm tired." I said, "Tell me what you're tired from." Another silence. Longer this time. Then she said, "I think I've been doing something wrong in how I handle the house. He's been helping me figure out a better system." She paused. "I'm not very organized." My daughter had managed medication schedules for 16 pediatric patients at a time. She had never in her life been unorganized. I said, "You're one of the most organized people I know." She said, "I used to think so too." That was the moment. That was the sentence that ended my silence. I did not tell her what I was thinking. I did not ask her anything else that morning. I said that I loved her, and I was proud of her, and I would see her soon. I kept my voice warm and even. And after I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, with my coffee going cold in front of me. I am a family court advocate. I have sat across tables from women who could not remember who they were before the relationship began. Women who apologized for being confused. Women who described their own competence in the past tense. I recognized the shape of what was happening to my daughter. And I had one advantage that I had not always had in my professional life. I knew the family, not well but enough. His mother lived about 40 minutes outside of Atlanta, in a large house that she kept immaculate and referred to often. He visited her every other Sunday. My daughter had started going with him, which was new. She had gone occasionally in the first year, but now she went every time. I had met his mother 3 times. She was a small woman, precise and well-dressed, with opinions about everything and a way of offering them that made them sound like simple facts. The first time we met, she had commented on my daughter's hair. She wore it natural, always had, and said that it must take a lot of maintenance. Said it pleasantly, like she was just observing the weather. The second time, at a birthday dinner for him, she had asked my daughter about the hospital and then, without a visible pause, said it must be hard to keep a house well when you work such irregular hours. My daughter had said it was a balance. His mother had nodded in a way that meant she did not believe her. The third time, I watched his mother address nearly every comment about my daughter's life to him instead of to her. She asked him how my daughter was adjusting to married life. She asked him whether my daughter had considered the schedule change that would allow her to be home for dinner more reliably. She spoke about my daughter the way you speak about a renovation project, something with potential that requires ongoing supervision. He answered all of her questions. Thoughtfully, in detail. I watched my daughter sit quietly and eat her food. Now I want to tell you about the Sunday dinner, because this is the part that mattered most, and I want you to understand it completely. My daughter called me on a Friday and said they were having Sunday dinner at his mother's house and asked if I would come. She said it in a way that was slightly too casual, the way people ask for something they actually need but don't want to admit they need. I said yes immediately. When I arrived, his mother was already in the kitchen. She greeted me with the kind of warmth that has always seemed like a performance to me. The big smile, the both hands, the comment about how wonderful it was to finally have everyone together. She had made a full meal. The table was set precisely. She had opinions about where everyone should sit. My daughter was helping in the kitchen. She moved carefully in that kitchen. She anticipated his mother's requests before they were made. She thanked his mother for small things in a way that sounded like she was being careful not to owe anything. She looked, in that kitchen, like someone who had learned the rules of a place through a series of consequences she did not want to repeat. We sat down to dinner. His mother led the conversation. He contributed to it. I asked my daughter a direct question, something about a new program at the hospital she had mentioned, wanting to apply for, and she started to answer. She was 2 sentences in, and her face had a little light in it, the light she always got when she talked about work. And then he said, she decided not to pursue that. My daughter stopped speaking. She looked down at her plate. She said, we talked about it. The timing wasn't right, he said. The hours would have been too much on top of everything else. His mother said, that's very sensible. A home requires a person's full attention. My daughter said nothing. She moved a piece of food on her plate. I looked at my daughter's hands. They were still in her lap. She had stopped eating. I looked at her face, and it was the face of someone who has gone somewhere else inside themselves. Somewhere quiet, somewhere unreachable, somewhere that had developed over time as a form of survival. I excused myself to use the restroom. I walked down the hallway. I stopped in the hallway. I stood there for a moment, breathing, the way I had learned to breathe in 34 years of work, before saying something important. Then I went back to the table. I sat down. I looked at my daughter and I said, tell me more about the program. I'd love to hear about it. She looked at me. For a moment she looked the way she had looked when she was 6 years old and had gotten a small thing wrong and was waiting to see whether the world would end. Then something shifted in her face. A very small shift. She said, it's a fellowship for nurses who want to move into pediatric advocacy. I said, that sounds like it was made for you, he said. Like I said, the timing. I said, I'm asking my daughter. The table went quiet. His mother set down her fork. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on my daughter, and I waited. She talked for 4 minutes. 4 minutes about the fellowship, about why she wanted it, about what it would mean, and as she talked, the light came back. Not all the way, but enough. Enough that I could see it. Dinner ended shortly after. In the car, before I left, my daughter knocked on my window. I rolled it down. She said, thank you for coming. I drove home. And then I did the one thing I had always saved for the situations where I was not projecting, where I was not being overprotective, where everything I had learned in 34 years was telling me that a woman I loved was in danger. I made a call, not to the police, to a colleague, a woman I had worked alongside for over 2 decades, who had spent her career building cases around coercive control, who had written the training manual that half the state's advocates still used. I called her and I told her everything, methodically, in the order it had happened. The corrections, the parking garage calls, the necklace, the program he had made the decision about on her behalf, the way his mother spoke about her as a project, the way my daughter's hands had gone still in her lap. My colleague listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what this is." I said, "Yes." She said, "What do you need?" Over the next 3 weeks, quietly, and without announcing it, I connected my daughter to resources. Not by sitting her down and telling her what I saw. I knew from 34 years that this approach rarely worked and sometimes accelerated the danger. Instead, I created opportunities. I invited her to lunch with a friend of mine who happened to be a therapist who happened to specialize in exactly this. I mentioned, casually, a support line I had recently come across. I said I had been thinking about her and her fellowship application and wondered if she had kept the materials. I let her find her own doorway. I just made sure there were doors. She called me on a Wednesday morning, 11 weeks after that Sunday dinner, from the hospital parking garage. But this call was different. This call she started by saying, "Mama, I need to tell you something." She talked for 40 minutes. She talked about things I had seen and things I hadn't known. She cried twice and stopped crying both times on her own. She said she didn't know when she had started feeling like a guest in her own life. She said she had been scared to say it out loud because saying it out loud made it real. I said, "It's already real. You just get to decide what you do with it now." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I applied for the fellowship." I did not cry until after I hung up. Then I sat in my kitchen, with my coffee going cold, the same way I had sat months before, and I let myself feel all of it. The fear I had swallowed, the grief for the time she had lost, and underneath both of those things, something smaller and stronger and more stubborn, relief. She had found her voice. She had found it on her own, because I had learned a long time ago that I could not find it for her. The road after that was not simple. It never is. But my daughter, who had once managed the medication schedules of 16 pediatric patients at a time, turned out to be extraordinarily organized when it came to rebuilding her own life. She had help. She had support. She had a mother who had been taking notes for longer than she knew, and a colleague whose phone number I still have saved under the words "first call." She got the fellowship. She starts in the fall. I am telling you this story because his mother was right about one thing, and only one thing. A home does require a person's full attention, but the home I am talking about is the one inside you, the one that you have to tend carefully, the one that someone can dismantle room by room if you stop paying attention, the one that you can rebuild, always, no matter how long the work has been going on. My daughter runs in the mornings now. She has been doing it since January. She calls me sometimes from the path, breathing a little hard, telling me about what she saw, a dog she passed, a garden someone is starting, the light on a certain corner at 7 in the morning, in April. I listen to every word. If you are watching this, and you recognize your own story, not all of it, maybe just a sentence, maybe just the parking garage calls, maybe just the way your hands went still, I want you to know that you are not confused. You are not disorganized. You are not too sensitive or too much or not enough. You know what you know, trust it. And if you are a parent or a friend or anyone who loves someone and has been watching quietly and waiting to be sure, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask a real question and then leave space in the silence for a real answer. What would you have done in my place? And what city are you watching from?